When it comes to low light performance, I want to see how the brand new Lumix S1II and the S1R2 stack up against the Sony FX2. Recently, there's been a few videos circulating online suggesting that Lumix is a better low light camera than Sony, and I'm going to put that to the test today. Now, with Panasonic, we're going to be filming in Vlog, and on Sony will be S-Log3. And we're going to start at the base ISOs and move our way up to 2,000, then 4,000, then 12,800, and then 25,600. Up first, we have the Sony FX2, and we are going to be filming in XAVC HD 4K with flexible ISO. Today, we have our beautiful model, Christine. Thank you so much. And we're going to start off at the base ISO. Now, the ISO ranges for the FX2 is 800 and 4,000. It's a dual native ISO. So we're going to start at 800. We're going to dial in our proper exposure and just make sure everything looks really good and cohesive. And we're going to start there and go ahead and record. So we're recording right here for 5 seconds. And then what we're going to do is we're going to increase our ISO to 2000 and then compensate with the aperture or shutter. We're at f6.3 now, ISO 2000. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and move up to 4000 ISO. So now we're at ISO 4000, which is our dual native ISO. It's the higher circuit. We're going to go ahead and move to 12,800. We're at f16. Everything looks really good here. And so we'll be able to take a look in post in a second and see how the noise is performing. But we're at 12,800 on the FX2, and the higher circuit usually kicks in at 4,000. So we'll see how this performs. Now let's go ahead and move to 25,600, and we'll be able to compare the noise. We have a really dark shadow region over here on the left, and then we also have really good light everywhere else. We can see the colors. So we'll be able to see if there's any color shift going on in noise. All right, now we have the Lumix S1R2, and we're going to be filming in Vlog. We're also at 24 on our focal range. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our settings. We're going to be in 8K on this camera and 24 frames per second. We are going to also have dynamic range expansion log on so that we get the cleanest image possible. So we're going to start at the base ISO, which is 400. Whenever you're in the dynamic range expansion log on, it'll be 400, and 2000 will be the dual native ISO range there. So we're going to go ahead and start and make sure that everything is properly exposed, which it looks really good. And then we're going to start at 400 for 5 seconds right here. Now we're going to move up to 2000. We're at ISO 2000 and we're at F9. Looks really good. Now let's move up to ISO 4000. Our aperture is now at F13. On the monitor, it looks really great, so it looks really clean. Now let's jump up to 12,800. Now we're going to adjust our shutter a little bit so we can get it a little bit darker. And we're at 12,800. Seeing a little bit of noise in the top right-hand corner of the lamp on the screen on the monitor here. Now let's go to 25,600. We're going to increase our shutter, and it looks like there's a lot of color noise on the S1R2. The shadows on her shirt look green right now on this monitor. So it feels very noisy. It looks like the FX2 is much cleaner, at least from the monitor. We'll take a look at the actual files and see how they look. But right now, I am seeing some considerable noise in the shadows where it's shifting the color to being green. All right, last up we have is the Lumix S1II. And this is the one that a lot of people online are saying is the Sony killer, where it has really good low light. So we're going to go ahead and test that out now. Now I have my settings dialed in where we're going to be filming in 5.9K, 24 frames per second. We also have dynamic range boost mode is on. So whenever it's on, the native ISO is going to be 1000. If the dynamic range boost is off, it'll be 640 and 5000. So, but we want to have the cleanest image possible. So we're going to film in dynamic range boost mode on. All right, so we're filming at 1000 ISO. I have my shutter at 80 and my f-stop at f4, and this looks properly exposed. And we're going to go ahead and record for 5 seconds and take a look at the footage in a little bit. All right, now we're going to increase our ISO to 2000. All right, we're now at 5.6. Looking good. Model is gorgeous as always. Let's move to ISO 4000. Monitor looks great, so I don't really see much noise on the screen. Let's now move to 12,800. And it looks pretty good so far, yep. Seeing a little bit more noise in the top right corner of the lamp and the shadows there. But overall, I don't see any color shift necessarily yet on the screen, on the display. And lastly, let's move up to 25,600. It looks pretty noisy on the shadows. It doesn't look like it's turning green like it was on the S1R II, at least on the display, but it does look noisier. So we'll make sure that we're testing that in post. But we're at f22, 100 shutter speed, 25,600, and it still looks pretty good. So we'll take a look and dial that in post and see how things are turning out. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the footage more closely in post and compare the results. All right, we have all the clips here in DaVinci Resolve, and we're going to go through the different ISO ranges and compare all the shots and see which one performs better and in what scenarios do we want to stay at certain intervals of ISO based on the camera. Now, let's go ahead and first take a look at our project settings for DaVinci Resolve. So we have our color management. We're using DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate for our timeline color space, which is how our tools will respond. And then our output color space is Rec. 79A because I'm on a Mac display. And then also the 3D interpolation, make sure that's set to tetrahedral. Okay. So we have these clips here, and now the first thing that we really need to do is we want to identify how we're properly matching all these clips together, because I think that's going to be super important. So we're going to navigate to this first clip here. We're going to go over to our color tab, and we're going to select this first clip. Now this first clip is a Sony clip. This is the FX2, and this is the node tree that I currently have set up to properly match all these clips. So the first thing that we're doing is we are using our Gamut baselet conversions to go from the camera color space and gamma to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. We're doing our adjustments with exposure and white balance, and then we're moving into DaVinci Wide Gamut to 709 LUT that we have as well, which already has our tone mapping dialed in and everything. Now, to get accurate results, it's very important that we make sure that our gamma curve is properly set up for each camera. Now, for the FX2, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight this chart here, and we can see our grayscale. Let's pull up our scopes here, and we want to make sure that whenever we're properly exposing our gray chart here, this gray patch is going to be middle gray, 18% middle gray, and in Rec. 79, that's going to equate to about 42 on the IRE scale. So we can see right here our third patch is on 42 IRE. If we disable our conversion, what do you think middle gray should be for Sony S-Log3? 41. So it should be at 41 on the IRE scale. So that means we've properly captured this clip. So we have it at 41 IRE. So when we add our conversion, it moves it up to 42 IRE. We don't have our tone mapping dipping too low, which is changing our middle gray. We like to keep it a little bit higher. So we know that this is properly set up. Our white, or our high, I guess our whitest patch on this chart is going to be sitting right around 70 on the IRE scale. And then our black patch is closer to like 16 or 17 on the IRE scale. One interesting note for FX2, the black levels are going to sit closer to, I believe, 9 on the IRE scale, where Panasonic is going to lift a little bit higher, and we'll show that in just a second. Now let's navigate to the S1R2. We're going to do the same thing with our chart and take a look at that, and we can see that we have an exact match. So we have our middle gray here at 42, and also our white point is closer to 70, or our white chip, and then the black level is similar. Now, what do you think middle gray is for Panasonic Vlog? It is 42. So S-Log3 is going to be around 41. Vlog is going to be 42. So when it's properly converted, it's going to sit right there. That allows us to know that we have the proper gamma curve adjustment with our conversion, which I think is really important. So if I'm navigating between the S1R2 and now this is the S1II, let's also turn on the chart. We can see that we have a proper match between all of them. So that means we're going to be looking at these clips, and we're going to have a really great accurate reading of our shots to make sure that we're understanding where these black levels are, and the shadows and all the other differences in color is going to be consistent across the different cameras. Now, I'll break down later when we want to use a color space transform, or how that differs from our baselets and why things fall apart there. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and start analyzing these clips and taking a look at how they all match. Let's first start off by looking at these three clips that are back to back to each other. So also one thing I just wanted to mention here in our timeline, anything that is labeled pink is going to be the native ISO for that camera. Our top channel here, the V3, is going to be the S1II, the middle one is S1R2, and the bottom one is the FX2. So here we have the native ISO for all these cameras. On the FX2, it's going to be 800 ISO. On the S1R2, it's going to be 400 ISO, and the Panasonic S1II is going to be 1000 ISO. So this should be the cleanest image that you get from these cameras at these ISO intervals. And I think it's very important the way that we profile this, instead of just showing the log clip, which here we can see all the clips in log, but if we just show the log clip, I feel like it's not an accurate real-world example of how things will look in the noise. So this, to me, feels like the most accurate real-world example to identify how the noise performs. Now, let's go ahead and just push play. We're looking at these clips first at the native ISO ranges from the FX2, the S1R2, and the S1II, and then we're going to bump up to ISO 2000. So now they're all at 2000 ISO. The S1R2 is native ISO, is 2000 ISO. Now we're at 4000 ISO, and the FX2 is higher circuit, kicks in at 4000 ISO. Now things start to get interesting. We are now at 12,800 ISO across all the cameras, and I'm starting to see a lot more noise on the S1R2 and the S1II, but the FX2 still looks pretty good. And then here at 25,600, you can clearly see there's a lot more noise, and we're getting color noise in the S1R2 and a little bit into the S1II. So if we just pause this for a second and we compare the 25,600 ISO across these cameras, I want you to tell me which ones you think looks better. And objectively, as I'm looking at these clips, the FX2 is much better in low light than the S1R2 or the S1II. We can see clearly that the S1R2 is introducing a lot of green color shift happening in the shadows, and with the S1II, the shadows are leaning a little bit more red, while the Sony FX2 is very clean and very neutral in the shadows, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, if we want to take a look a little bit closer, let's navigate to this section right here. So I've zoomed in on this color chart, and we can analyze it. We're looking at our scopes to see how the noise looks and how, if there's any color shift. We can see that all the colors are pretty close to accurate. Between them, all the density levels are fairly similar, and our exposure is all identical across all these different cameras. So we're going to go ahead and just scan through these clips and see how they look. So now we're looking at 4000 ISO here. And on 4000, remember the FX2, this is the native ISO, and this still looks really good. The S1R2 still holds up nicely, and the S1II still looks really good. Now let's navigate over to 12,800 ISO. So 12,800 ISO is starting to show some issues with the noise. Now, let me navigate a little bit closer and zoom in so that you can kind of see this. I'm going to squeeze over to here and just zoom in. So we're looking at the FX2, the S1R2, and the S1II. And what I'm noticing is the noise just looks really pleasing here on the FX2. And remember, this isn't the high circuit. This isn't the dual native ISO. The dual native ISO on the FX2 is 4000, and we're at 12,800, and this looks really good. If this was on the FX3 or the A7S III, their dual native ISO is going to be 12,800, and that's probably going to be even more clean than this. So Sony is really good in low light, and when we see how it performs across these different clips, it kind of makes me question, why are people saying the S1II is a better low light camera than Sony? Because when we look at 25,600 right here, we clearly see a green cast happening in the shadows on the S1R2, and then the S1II, we're getting some more red in the shadows, while the Sony FX2 looks really good. So comparing these three clips at 25,600, which again, I'm rarely ever filming at that high ISO, but I want to know the limit that I can push a camera. And for this tells me that if I'm on the FX2, I can push this beyond 25,600 and it holds together nicely. All the colors aren't shifting in weird ways. However, we do get the neutral color to shift. So if we look at our scopes right here on the vector scope and we look at our neutral patch, which is closer to the middle, once we get to 25,600, we get this bump towards green, which is happening for the S1R2. I would not go above 12,800 on the S1R2. And if I did with the S1II, I just need to compensate for the shadow noise. So that is really helpful information for me whenever I was looking at these clips and trying to compare the differences. Now, one thing I want to break down is I want to showcase the differences between a color space transform and our baselets, and why a color space transform is not an accurate representation whenever you're comparing different cameras, because you have variances in color hues and shifts between different camera sensors, and that's not taken into account with a color space transform. And let me show you why. So I'm going to go to our native ISO ranges for each one of these cameras. Okay, so we have the FX2, and then we have the S1R2 and S1II. I'm going to go ahead and just turn off the FX2, and I'm going to select the S1R2, and I'm just going to turn on a color space transform. We're going to use Panasonic V-Log V-Gamut to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate with no tone mapping, okay? And then we're going to do the same for the next clip. So now we have the S1II and the S1R2 using the exact same color space, okay? Now let's compare the results. If we look at this vector scope, we can clearly see that there are differences in saturation levels between the colors. And as I'm looking through this, I can see the green patch here on the S1II is a lot more vibrant than the S1R2. You can see that's really cranked out here. Also, the blue channel is a lot more bright. It's a little bit brighter in luminance, and also it's much more saturated. So if you're trying to match the S1II and the S1R2 together, you're going to have issues with saturation that you're going to have to dial back the reds and blues on the S1II to match the S1R2, because it's really punchy. And that's probably why you might notice some tests where people are like, oh, I love the color science between the S1II. And all it is it's just pumping more saturation, but it's incorrectly accounting for that color shift. And the color space transform is not taking into account the variance in color science between the different camera sensors. And that's why we built our Gamut baselets. So if you come over here and we enable our baselet for DaVinci Wide Gamut, you can see that these colors are now accurate and really close to each other. So the blues are right next to each other, the greens. So all these saturation levels are matched, and you're going to get a really clean matching image. Now, if we turn on the FX2, let's take a look at that. The FX2 is pretty good right off the bat, but there are a little bit differences in density levels between different colors and the greens. So if I turn off our baselet and just turn on the color space transform, the greens are leaning more yellow. So they're not accurately represented on this color checker chart where it should be a little bit bluer greens. And that was one thing I noticed right off the bat with this. And so whenever you disable the color space transform and improperly enable our baselet, you get a proper match between all three of these cameras properly. Now, if you're curious about what goes into our baselets, we have all this information on our website, along with a catalog of all the specs for white papers and everything that I've accumulated over the past year. We've profiled over 50 cameras now. And if you're looking at the S1II, here I have all the information on the native ISO based on if you're in dynamic range boost mode on or off, where the white clipping point is. So we can tell that on V-Log, V-Gamut, with dynamic range boost on the S1II, whites are going to clip at 93%. But if you have it off, it's going to clip at 88%. And also it tells you the different native ISO ranges. So if you're curious, oh, what should my settings be? This is a great cheat sheet. Just select any camera that you're using on our website for baselets, and I have this all cataloged for that individual camera. Even our log C3 adjustments here. Also, one thing I noticed is when you're in dual native ISO, there's no dual native ISO whenever your dynamic range boost mode is on for the S1, but the screen looks cleaner at 8000 ISO. or it'll look cleaner at 6400 ISO, depending on if you're using dynamic range boost mode on or off. So just a lot of helpful information that I've tested across all these different cameras. If you want to check them out, visit our website at Gamut, click on base LUTs and select the camera. You will get a really great accurate match across all of your cameras. And what's powerful is it's already built for DaVinci wide gamut too. So we have it not necessarily for a Rec 7, we have it for a Rec 7 IX, but also DaVinci wide gamut. Even D-Log M for the Osmo Pocket 3, we have that. We even have Olympus OM 400 log for DaVinci wide gamut. So Zcam log 2 or Z-Log 2. So we have all these different profiles properly developed for DaVinci wide gamut. So if you want to work in this pipeline, you can actually get access to this really great intermediate color space when you're working in DaVinci Resolve. So my final thoughts when it comes to low light keen, who really stands out? I would have to say that the FX2 performs the best when you're comparing the FX2, the S1R2, and the S1II. Clearly, there are some noise issues in the Lumix cameras. The S1R2 leans green in the shadows, so I would not go above 12,800 ISO on the S1R2. If you go above that on the S1II, you're going to have to compensate for that noise that is introducing more red shift in the shadows. So keep that in mind. But if you're on a Sony camera like the FX2, you're going to have a really good neutral shadows. Things look really pleasing. There's no color shift really happening. The noise looks really nice. I feel like you've got really good texture that's taking place on the FX2. When you're looking at the S1R2, things are starting to fall apart. I'm getting more green in the shadows. And then the S1II is leaning more red. So you can clearly see that the FX2 honestly is a better low light keen than the S1II or the S1R2 from Lumix. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to see what you think. I've seen some examples online where people are saying the S1II is a low light killer, is the low light keen, beating out the FX3. Now, I haven't tested the FX3. I've only done the FX2, and the FX2 beats out the S1II in my tests. And the FX3 has a native ISO dual range at the 12,800 mark. So I would assume it's also better. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are. I appreciate you sticking around and watching this tutorial. If there's any other camera tests that you want to see compared, let me know in the comments. Make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss another film, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.